Hello and welcome back to Final Sector. This is our US Grand Prix, the actual US Grand Prix, not the other US Grand Prix that just happened, or the one that's going to be coming up, the other US Grand Prix that's happening later. This is the US Grand Prix. We had another sprint weekend. This sprint kind of stinky. We'll get that out of the way quickly.
Isn't it interesting that it was one we thought may be the best sprint of the year, and it turned out to be the least good sprint of the year? It's funny how these things work. It's a wonder we say why this sport's hard to predict, and even stuff like this. Who knows?
The track lent itself so well to it, and it just, I don't know if it was just the fact that, I know it caught a lot of teams out, the lack of the practice, which again, that'll come into stuff we talk about in the feature race as well, but the lack of practice, I don't know if that sort of played a big part in teams.
This
not
seems like the first weekend where, often we'll have a sprint and commentators and whoever will say, oh, look, or maybe if the sprint race doesn't work, this reduced practice thing is pretty good. And yet this weekend, everyone's coming out going, it kind of made everything worse, and people were, too safe with things, weren't sure, experienced where they didn't know how hard to push, blah, blah, blah. So it's interesting that narrative has sort of changed, to the other side of the fence. So, we'll wonder if it's going to increase or decrease next year. It's still a bit...
Yeah, it's tough. Yeah, I mean, I think it did help. Again, it's something I think we'll talk about in the feature race section of this, but I think it did help in some aspects that maybe people aren't really thinking about. But yeah, in this instance, it was sort of just like it just didn't really work. I think they needed just the nature of the track being so bumpy. It was hard for teams to dial in the right setup. You had teams to touch on the feature race briefly, you had Aston and Haas both starting both cars from the pit lane because they made setup changes outside of Parc Fermé. So, or in Parc Fermé rather. So they had to start from the pit lane. So I mean they actually, Aston in particular actually finished okay. They had pretty good pace, and if they didn't, they would have been nowhere. But So I think there's definitely some things to think about. I think I did see something just popped up as I was researching, something we can talk about end of year, but they are looking at potentially shaking things up for the sprint weekend. They said they're not afraid to get aggressive with it, in terms of, if it's not working or if it's boring, which this one obviously was. They've recognized that they're just like, hey, we'll just look at, the few things that we've discussed before, the own sprint championship where it's self-contained points and all that, so that way you don't get things like Max winning the championship on a Saturday sprint sort of thing, or the reverse 10 top 10 grid like they do in F2 and F3, those sort of things they're at least thinking about doing. They obviously don't want to.
They don't just want to scrap it entirely, but they're still saying, well, hey, if it doesn't work, we're not going to force you to do something that doesn't work. We're going to keep trying because we want to do something extra here. We know there's something here. We've seen it work. We've got to look at what worked in those instances, and then take the good out and then the bad out. Like this weekend, figure out why that was bad and put that away and change it around for something. So we'll have to see.
The other suggestion that I haven't seen before is if they can get a sponsor on board, have its own sprint championship, but rather than for points, they have a sponsor that's just like, hey, there's $1 million prize or something for whoever wins the sprint championship. So, but that again does start to get a little bit biased to the team that's dominating or the driver that's dominating, Max Verstappen. So then it's. I mean, we'll talk about that end of season. That's a whole other talking point. I think we've still got one more sprint to go, so we'll reserve judgment until then. But talking about this one, we had Sainz. I think was the only driver to start on the softs. Everyone else was either on used or new mediums. Turns out the softs not a good choice. They were pretty shit. They were good initially, and then they were shit, which I think everyone pretty much predicted. I think Sainz just sort of, I guess he just decided just go for it and just didn't really work out. But
I guess where he was starting. I mean, they kind of thought he was probably going to finish best case 7th. So they're like, well, if we can get anything better than a 7th on finish, then this is the best way we're going to do it.
Yeah.
I suppose what was interesting, 2 things there. One, first weird blunder from Ferrari of many. We're back in this territory again. Hey.
Yeah.
Second, kind of people finding that almost like the used medium when they started was better than a new medium. And
that was weird.
Just how the tire warmed up, how it was early on, how it kind of wore through.
Yeah.
So it ended up, again, probably something that they couldn't really find out during practice. And so that kind of led into the main race. There was a lot of discussion even saying, you know, in terms of tire you want to go on, hey, best tire is a used medium, then it's a new hard, then it's a new medium. It's like what that... and just that was very much the whole figuring it out during the race aspect, where teams kind of just, you know, were like, well, we don't know what's going on because we didn't get to try it out. And sometimes that can work great, and apparently here it worked where it kind of just fluffed everything up and might have, you know, taken a bit of fight out of it. But
I guess just putting those tires through that one heat cycle for whatever reason, just I don't know, woke them up so they
at a circuit like this, it obviously it's interesting.
Yeah, there you go. The start of the sprint race did prove to be quite interesting. We obviously saw the Max shove Charles almost into the pit wall off the start. Which was borderline. Even Charles came out and said after the race, he's like, I would have done the same thing. So
yes, he immediately said there's no ill word. He handled that perfectly.
So I think everyone pretty well got through T1 okay. I think there was a little bit of contact. It was almost just
like a little... Yeah, it's surprising they didn't, because it is Austin. It is often a track where you see, you know, past years a quite a big bump. At T1, of course, you know, we had some bumps in other places, but not T1 in this case. And it being the sprint, you'd think people might have been a bit more racy for it. But I mean, overall, it feels like this sprint was almost just like a teaser for the race. Like, although it simmered down quite quickly, the grid wasn't as mixed up as the grid we started with in the main race. It felt like there was a few stories starting to play out, but because it was a sprint, it kind of fizzled out. So I think the nature of these tires, the track meant it was really hard to be racy early on, and racing almost happened in the second stint of the tire's life, which this sprint didn't exist in. And therefore we kind of just got a bit of a follow everyone around extended practice session. Some teams finding out they've actually got some massive setup changes that they need to figure out quick for the race. But it all around just kind of fizzled out.
Like you say, the only thing that was sort of like interesting towards the end, I think Norris was really closing in on Leclerc, on those worn tires, which again alluded to you know, the Sunday race as well. You know, you could look at that and be like, oh, okay, maybe McLaren hadn't looked particularly strong all weekend, particularly Piastri. He looked well off Norris this weekend. But they just didn't look quite as there as they have been the last few races. And this just showed that, you know, actually their race pace is still quite good compared to Ferrari on those worn tires. So he didn't quite get Leclerc in the end on that sprint, but it definitely showed us there was a little bit of something. And thankfully, at least the main race we had, which I guess we can just touch on now, we had Max starting P6, which is something we don't say very often. In fact, I don't think we've said it at all this season. I don't think he's ever started P6 this season.
Well, and why did he start in P6? What's this trend that we knew may come up here again?
Track limits.
That we predicted, track limits, yes. This is a good one to have the track limits discussion, because it showed people how this is actually quite difficult if you were there watching everything that was going on. Because they didn't just have the F1, they had things like the Porsche Super Cup. And the Porsche Super Cup uses those rules like the IndyCar and otherwise, where there's basically no track limits. And people in F1 were watching going, what does it look like when we change to no track limits? And everyone went, this looks fucking ridiculous. Why are they running out like 3 wide off the track and it's allowed? It's like, that looks horrible. It's like, well, obviously that's why this is hard, because they allow this like IndyCar does, and that looks like trash. And then you've got what we're doing, where we're painting over curbs overnight to try and fix little issues that just doesn't work as well.
So weird. And the fact that they even said on comms as well, it's like, I think they painted over that curb.
They were looking, they're like, that looks different.
That looks
and then they
wider,
couldn't figure it out. They were like, is it wider? Is it there? And then they were discussing between themselves. So
and then just like,
at least with Qatar,
I'm glad no one told us. Like, no one.
Yeah, no. At least with Qatar, they said, hey, this is exactly what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. So everyone's like, okay. Here they just did something, and it's like, Okay.
Yep.
Now we just feel like we're just really trying to something because we're out of like quick term ideas,
Yeah.
which, yeah. I mean, and now everyone's saying, hey, well, everyone knows what the real answer is. The answer is so-called natural track limits, which is where rather than having tarmac there, you have something else where if you go over the line, then
The
you're
old
either losing a
gravel,
ton because you're
just
going
put
in
gravel
dirt,
down,
you're going in
yeah.
gravel, you're going in grass, which is like, okay, that's fair enough. Yes, like there's a bigger discussion there because there's a safety thing.
Mm.
There's some circuits where for bikes where they also race, that's not appropriate.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
and then you go, well, go
I
on.
was going to say I think the biggest one that could happen is like the AstroTurf. Like they always say the
Yeah.
AstroTurf because that does, like at Suzuka, they've got AstroTurf in a couple of places, and that does actually slow you down. I think about, I mean, they have grass there as well, but like, I think Degna 2 does that have AstroTurf on the exit?
Exeter Dane 2 has a little, even around Spoon, it has a lot on the outside of
Yes.
Spoon, which is where people sometimes go off.
Yeah.
And instantly they go wide as hell because
Yeah.
there's no group, they've got nothing out there.
Yeah,
So.
I mean, they could do something like that. Again, this is probably a discussion we can have in more depth, sort of post-season, but
Yeah, for sure. There'll be,
yeah.
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it just shows like it wasn't quite as bad as Qatar last weekend, but it definitely did show up in both qualifyings and the race
Yeah.
as well. So yeah, it is.
But it certainly affected, it's set up, we had... This again made us more excited for the sprint because we saw this Friday.
Yeah.
This is going to be great. But at least when the sprint ended, we thought, well, hey, we know actually things are looking more
Yeah.
exciting. We kind of saw the different teams have very differing, wear pace on these tires. So hopefully that means for the main race, we actually have something quite spicy to watch and to let play out in front of us.
Yeah, we did. Obviously, like as I mentioned earlier, we had Max starting P6, which he looked, from qualifying. I know qualifying's not generally a pretty good representation because Max's or that Red Bull race pace is just generally a lot better than their qualifying pace. But even from both qualifyings, he was close to like it was like. In the sprint qualifying, I think there was 1/10 between, even though he got pole, it was 1/10 between him, Hamilton, Leclerc, and Norris, I think, were the top four. And then obviously he would have had P1 before the track limits, but it would have, like in the main qualifying, but it would have only just been, I think it was like half a tenth.
Like
and
even if you say he was in track limits there, that might have like lost in the time to actually get it. It wasn't just like he was half a second ahead and he made a dolt,
Yeah.
It was that marginal where he actually did have to push that hard and he made the mistake.
Yep.
This is probably one of the first times, again, it didn't really play out that way, but hey, this is one of those first times Max under pressure probably made a little error, know. If you're gonna do it, then I guess do it here rather than bidding it during the race or whatever.
And once the championship's all wrapped up. And,
exactly, yes. So. But still, it's credit to the others. They put in a solid lap. They put him under pressure, and he made the mistake. So
and that's enough. Like, it's not like he put in a stupid good first lap as well that would have got him P1 anyway.
Yeah.
It's like this is enough to drop him to P6.
That banker was P6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's insane. Like that's it's crazy how much it can drop him now and how at least on one lap pace, on race pace as well, but particularly one lap pace, he has to push for pole. Like he can't make mistakes, I don't think. At most places. It's all caveats.
Indeed.
But
at least he knows that even if he makes a mistake, he's going to be challenged by both the Ferraris, maybe both the McLarens. We'll see how they go. Both the Mercedes. But Checo, he's still not going to beat him. He's still going to start a few places behind him. He's going to make sure, Max, it's okay. I'm still going to start behind you. I'm going to block off Piastri for you because he's the real threat.
Yep. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. It turned around real quick from Perez being your favorite driver to Perez bashing real quick. Like it's he did it to himself. Let's be fair.
But if he just we don't need to go into that. It's a post-year thing. Hey, post-year, I'm happy to go over that because
Yeah, but so we had what ended up being, I think, quite an interesting race. Max didn't.
We had an interesting start. We had Leclerc. Obviously, you'd think, hey, he started P2. He kind of got shown the door. Will he do the same to Norris? But Norris, in that McLaren, as he's had most of the year, had a killer start. It was a beautiful start, positioned it right, and kind of fobbed him a bit.
Had to. Leclerc. Starting P1 he just didn't get away quick enough to even
It's always
try and
hard
cut
to
him
remember
off.
that he started P1. When
Yeah,
you look
I
at the
know,
results.
yeah.
I forgot. It's
Yeah.
like, what the hell happened?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we'll get into it.
But yeah, you watch the start and Norris, just such good launch away from the line. It's like, even if he tried to cover him off, I just don't know that he would have been able to, because by the time he would have even been starting to come across, Norris was already alongside and getting past. It's just like, yeah, it was such a good start from Norris. And even we'll talk about this briefly, seeing as we're talking on that, but Piastri got away quite well as well. He was starting P10.
Yes.
I think it was P10. And he jumped up to P6 by turn 2, I think. Actually getting past Ocon with a bit of argy-bargy. And it ended up taking both of them out of the race, unfortunately. So I think Piastri had a radiator leak, and Ocon had significant sidewall damage.
Significant side pod damage. Yeah, there was all sorts going on. He fell back through the grid and then realized it wasn't worth continuing. It was one of those bumps where, again, it feels like we've seen bumps bigger than this, and cars have continued. And in this, both of them hit. It even looked like the hit should have been worse for Piastri. But with how it worked out, it ended up, Ocon saw that more severe damage to begin with. And then it seemed like that was then, something was knocked loose, in Piastri's car, and that's when they needed to retire it. So it really was quite an innocuous bump, and that's what it took to take two cars out of the race, which is pretty rare to see, as we say, a bump like that do, 2 DQs. So unfortunate for both of them. They both didn't really blame each other when you see it. It was just hard racing, and they were just close to each other. It's not like one really hit the other one. So although they both seemed disappointed in it, particularly Piastri, I guess, he just said, look, this wasn't a great weekend anyway, so if this is how it's going to end, then, we can only go up from here. Ocon, I guess ever so briefly, we had a lot of news about this new Alpine consortium, that there's a new kind of like board of bigger sporting personalities that are bought into Alpine and management and such. Right, and a lot of them were there doing publicity talking about it. So for him to get taken out almost straight away was a bit of that's classic Alpine.
Well, at least
we even have at
least they had Gasly, I think, P8 in the end. He got some points. So
yes, the pace of that car again actually seemed pretty good. Yes, but it's a shame that one of them just an innocuous bump again, out almost without being able to show what they can do. So
definitely. I was going to talk. So we had obviously Max didn't get quite the jump on everyone else. I know we talk about a lot about how his starts aren't as good as even some of those around him. I think he did jump one place this time, so he obviously got an okay start. I feel like even starting that far back in sort of P6, it is about the start, but it's more about just staying out of trouble, like something that Piastri and Ocon didn't end up doing.
Yeah, exactly.
How easy it can be.
He could have been one of those. Yep.
It took him, probably 5 or 6 laps. He sort of waited for the field spread before he started overtaking everyone. It wasn't made super easy for him. Like, he still had to work for it. The DRS did help quite a lot, which you kind of expect with that Red Bull car. But he had to work for it, this one, particularly when it came to sort of the end of the race and he started having those brake issues, and Hamilton, who was closing on him really quickly, like a couple more laps and he would have got him, which wouldn't have mattered, obviously, because he got disqualified.
We could touch on that later. I like to look at this race outside of those, we'll touch on it at the end, right? There was the disqualification of 2 big drivers that did make a difference.
Let's just assume that didn't happen until we get to the...
it's not something that really made any sort of difference to their race pace, right? It's not like they were running underweight and therefore they were like bullets, So it's better to look at it in a vacuum as it was. But yes, I was going to say on that Max thing, this really was a race where, the commentators even early on were pointing out, saying, in the past, you may have just tried to, brazenly get past everyone and just rack the hell out of the car or whatever. But he wasn't. He was taking his time. And that was probably really important, because if he had issues at the end of the race, if he had have rushed that early phase, tried to do some more dive bombs, exactly, put more through those brakes, he may not have been able to finish the race. So although he couldn't have known at that time, he obviously knew it was a race with the trend of the weekend, with it being very bumpy, with a lot of heat, a lot of wear. other cars in the weekend already having massive braking issues, bigger brain to say, I'm going to calm down. I know I've got the pace. I'm starting behind. Let these guys play it out, fight. And then when this Red Bull, which it's done all year, gets into that second phase of its tires, he knows he's going to pass through everyone and be able to control it. So, again, he was given another pretty difficult challenge, which he did actually put himself in this time. And yet, it's hard to fault him over the course of the race, at least. It's hard to put a finger wrong with what he did, even if it was another one where, hey, we'll get into it. Other teams, if they made different decisions, were bang on the mark, could have probably taken advantage of that, but they didn't. And Red Bull and Max are the ones that just got it right, and therefore came out ahead on and some good choices. Yeah,
definitely. Well, let's talk about you touched on Perez earlier. He did end up. He takes a P5 on track, P4 after.
Yeah. I love how his over-the-line radio every time now is his mechanic saying good recovery. It's never good race.
Yeah.
Every time the word recovery is there. It's decent recovery, good recovery, because it is a recovery. It's not just like, he's expected to start through the back, he has a good race. So even when I heard it this time, I just laughed. I'm like, every time his engineer, good recovery.
Yeah.
His pace was fine, but if he was starting near the front, he could have bloody won the thing. If you look back to last year, he would have won this race. He would have started, he wouldn't have got that lap invalidated, he would have been first or second. At minimum, he gets second. He probably would have won on this pace, that he had, in the past.
Yeah. What else do you say?
I don't know what you want me to say, bro.
Yep.
The only two cars he beat was a Ferrari on a horrible strategy and Russell, which just seemed to not be enjoying life out there.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess slightly in his defense, it is, it's his best result for the last sort of 4 or 5 races, so...
Which, that's not in defense of him. That's actually really bad.
Yeah, you can take it both ways.
No, you can't. I'm sorry.
Yeah, actually, I got it here. His best race is Monza, which I think that's 4 or 5 races ago, and he got P2 that race, so... Which is where he should be, let's be honest. He really should be P2 at the very least. But
he should have won. We would have been saying 12 months ago, if he didn't win this, it would have been like, a bad day for him. Yeah. And now we're going, 5th, not bad.
Yeah. It's crazy how the expectations change that quickly, doesn't it? Yeah.
Oh, brother. He's bloody lucky because, again, talking about Hamilton being disqualified. If Hamilton wasn't disqualified, he's losing P2. This gives him the slightest chance to keep that P2.
Yep.
This is so lucky for him.
Yeah, it actually gives him quite a big buffer. I think it gives him... Because that's P4.
It's like up to 30-something.
It's 39 points. But I'm just wondering, if Hamilton was P2 and he was P5, I mean, it just would have been closer. I can't... Yeah. Now it gives him a chance to potentially keep Hamilton behind for P2.
It's divine intervention from the gods of Hernandez Rodriguez going, I'm not going to let this happen.
Yeah, a week in advance.
Podium in Mexico, you're going to... Yeah, we can't let you be overtaken during the Mexican Grand Prix weekend. This will be
the worst thing
laughing
ever,
stock of the world.
It could 39 points. Is that? Yeah, no,
I don't think it can be.
No, there's no sprint at Mexico, so yeah.
No, but
he
may have been in the other way around.
Yeah, that's true. Oh.
Anyway, that P2. Anyway.
Oh boy, yeah, we could talk about that postseason.
But I mean, yes, we could go Mercedes. I think.
Yep. Yeah.
We could touch on Russell a bit. I think he just had a rough weekend. I think, again, this track with the lack of practice, so I don't want to say this is, because it was odd we had a trend here where it's all the number 1 drivers seem to settle in better.
Yeah. Because we had, Norris Piastri, which we alluded to. Piastri was just off, and Russell was just off Hamilton. And,
yep.
I mean, we could talk about Perez being off Max, but as you say, that's just a given.
I know, but it's still, there's something there. But I think, it was a hard weekend. I think drivers just had to guess with their setup as best they could. And if the driver felt good with the track, then they were good. If not, well, then they weren't. There was a lot of comments about how this track surface, they're saying next year they have to redo it because they said it was ridiculous. It was bumpy. It was chaos. It was, they said this is the last year we could run this. We'd expect it to be buttery smooth next year when they come back. Obviously some drivers just, didn't drive with it. And then you look at Russell, he was only like 25 seconds off the lead, finishing on track in, what was it, 7th, really.
Yeah.
But it's only 25 off the lead. That's not that bad, you know. If you were near the start of the year finishing 25 seconds behind Max, you'd probably be pretty happy with it. It just goes to show that it's still very close between those top 4 teams.
Yeah.
And you've got to get everything right, the strategy right, the driver's got to be on it. And when you're just a bit behind, you know, I think he was, like half a second behind Leclerc. Yes, he ended up getting Leclerc anyway, but he was very close to him anyway, and not that far behind Checo. So, yeah, hard to say that Russell had a bad weekend. But I think Hamilton, on track-wise, do you think Mercedes actually threw away a win for him in another universe? Based on the decisions they made on the wall?
It's hard to say. You know, he obviously had that offset, which means he did have fresher tyres at the end. It's hard to say how much of an impact that had on his pace right at the end of the race. Maybe his offset was... I've actually got it here. Like, Max, his initial pit stop was... lap... 17. He went into the pits the first time, and Hamilton came in 4 laps later. And they went from, like, Max went onto the mediums, which meant he had the hards for the final stint, whereas Hamilton went onto the hards, which meant he had the mediums for the final stint. So, yeah, I think... And then it was, like, the second pit stops 3 laps later again, like he had a sort of a 3-lap offset. It's hard to say whether or not that had a difference. I don't know how important, you know, 3 or 4 laps in that first stint offset made. But yeah, maybe not. But at the end of the day, he was very close. Yeah,
it would have been close. And I think, of course, with him, like, I think if you look over the course of the whole race distance, even though he was stuck a bit, you could actually argue that Hamilton was probably the quickest guy out there over the whole race. Even you know, if you just put them both out there on separate tracks, they were saying over that race distance that car looked really good. But of course, he was more trying to consider around, you know, Norris and Sainz and others. That made it tricky. Part of something that really actually got, you know, Russell and Leclerc was that they really bet thinking that the one stop could work.
Yes.
And that's what they were thinking to do with Hamilton. That's where they had this bit of, you know, not mucking around, but I think, you know, they realized, I think, on that second or third lap, when they'd stayed out longer than Max, that he was losing like almost 3 seconds a lap.
I think he locked up into turn 1 as well on those old tires.
Yes,
on the broadcast,
as soon as he started doing it, and then they just knew
they just came in next lap.
This is really bad.
So,
and if they had came in the same time, yeah, it's hard to see how he still wouldn't have gained. You know, that's I think it said 6 to 9 seconds was like about how much they think they lost. Of course, they couldn't have known that Max would have brake issues, but his pace still outside of that before that at the end was decent anyway. And obviously he was comfortable out there. You know, I think was it Mercedes that brought the new floor to this race?
Yes.
It's kind of like their hybrid 2023-2024 floor. So obviously they can attribute some of that to here. Hamilton was very quick to say, this car feels way better. Of course, you know, this is Hamilton, where if he's finishing high, he's going to say that.
Yeah,
if he's finishing outside the podium, he might say, we've got to get back on the drawing board and figure this out. But it's still good to see that, that pace was strong by him. And we had a really genuine, you know, race at the end of it, of him chasing Max down. And it wasn't just Max having time in his pocket, so he wasn't racing around. He was stressed. You heard him on the radio. He was really stressed. He knew he was under pressure. And to his credit, he was telling his engineer, I've got to focus so I don't lose this race. Shut up, please. And you went, fair enough.
Yeah.
So
that's one thing I have noticed with particularly Hamilton, but that Mercedes is it's starting to become a trend. I'm trying to understand their race pace, like since they've actually been competitive again. And their race pace is, again, it could be the tire offset, but it seems like it's a constant. Their race pace on low fuel in particular is so strong. It seems to be even stronger than the Red Bull. Like
when that car's light, it comes alive.
Really, really good. And it's not the first time we've seen this. You know, we saw it at Singapore as well. And again, a lot of that's fresh tires, but they
Yeah.
were so fast at the
Well,
end of the
fresh
race
tires,
as
but if it was just a light car,
well.
then be like super strong in quality. So it seems like a light car that's been running around for over an hour, like when
Yeah.
everything's hot,
Yeah.
and other cars maybe start to slow down a bit, but their car seems to keep
faster,
working in like
yeah.
optimal kind of conditions, right? Yeah.
So, and I'm sure there was another race recently, maybe Japan, where it was a similar story where they're just fast.
Yeah.
They're just fast on
They
the
just
low
make those
fuel.
moves
Yeah.
towards the end of the race.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
just
know what you
becomes,
mean.
I don't know if
what you mean.
it just responds like it's like, you know, you're obviously heavier car. Maybe it's just like feels sluggish and like understeering.
Yeah,
but like
it could just be better cooling.
Yeah.
They could just have a
Could be
really
cooling,
good cooling
yeah,
package.
yeah,
So at the end of the
yeah.
race, as I say, they're nice and cool when others are having to back off a bit, or the car just naturally isn't performing in this high window. So
Yeah,
we'll have
so-
to keep an eye on that. That's
Yeah.
an interesting
yeah.
bit
So,
of analysis.
but yeah, it's really good to see that it was only like it was within a second and a half, and I think he could have had a genuine chance to catch him if there wasn't the back marker that ended up giving Max DRS down that back straight.
Yeah, it was fortunate.
Yeah, and I think that was sort of when that happened. It's like, yeah, I think he started to back off and just accepted the P2, but he was closing rapidly, like a second and a half a lap towards the end there. So it's really, really promising. Maybe even some of the later races, we know that you know, Brazil Mercedes have been incredibly strong in Brazil. So I think they could be looking to that. It's not that far away, Brazil. It's only a couple of weekends away. So I think they could be looking to that as a potential, hey, we might be able to win that one. But yeah, really good stuff. What else to talk about the race? We've already talked about the McLarens. I think Norris's weekend, he ends up P2. He finished P3, obviously behind Hamilton in the race. I think that a lot of that was probably just due to that Mercedes coming alive towards the end, and I think their race pace is just quite strong. But yeah, I think, I don't know. I don't know if it just seemed like they were not quite as fast. Maybe it's just the whole package all weekend. I don't know what you think. They just seemed a little
It's hard to say. I mean,
off, but-
early on it seemed a little off, but he still seemed quite racy. I think it's just that Hamilton, as you say, was really racy. But again, he
Might be all
didn't
it
finish
was.
that far off the top.
Yeah.
And where, you know, Sainz was running a pretty good race, he, you know, basically beat him as well.
I guess Sainz was let. We'll talk about Ferrari because I think that's an interesting one as well. But like Sainz was let past Leclerc, and he said he wanted to go after Norris, and made exactly no progress on Norris. So I guess, it shows that maybe they do have. I think it's hard to see. Like, we talk about this, how it's not just one team there anymore. Like, it was just Aston Martin. You know, it was just McLaren. Now
exactly.
it's like,
it could be any of those. Yeah,
it could be any of them.
The three.
Could
Yeah,
be,
and this was that weekend where you saw they had different strengths, different part of the race.
Yeah.
Some of them were quick right out the box. Some of them were quick later on the end stage of that tire. So
Yeah.
the pressure's on. The pressure's on for them, right?
Yeah.
It's hopefully it's like this for the end of towards the end of the year.
Yeah. Fingers crossed.
So again, you can't look at it and say it's a bad weekend because they didn't get P2. I mean, it's unlucky again with the contact with Piastri and he had an off weekend, but it's hard to point too many fingers when his form has been so superb recently. You know, it gets kind of like a pass almost. You know.
Yeah.
So
for sure. I guess the last thing I'll mention on McLaren is the fact that they have jumped Aston in the championship now.
Yes.
They have made comments in the last week as well where they think that it is possible for them to catch Ferrari. They're on.
What if they continued smashing out 2 3s and Ferrari were getting 5 6s or 6 7s?
Yeah, but 242 points to 322 points for Ferrari. It's 80 points. That seems like a tall order, but it'd be great to watch if they
a
could
team
do it,
that's
so.
motivated, a team that has traction can do anything. That's the big thing for Aston, where it seems so hard. Where even though you start high, as soon as you start falling, it's hard to get that belief that you can catch it up.
Yeah.
While McLaren, they start so far back, almost have nothing to lose, and when you start getting that momentum. It's like a freight train; it just keeps going up. You know, that's like the hole that Mercedes have been in. That's what people suspect. Is just it's hard, until you see that train to start moving, and then you can run with it. So, if that's what they're looking for, I think boys and girls, they should focus on it, and who knows what can happen, especially as we'll probably go into shortly with Ferrari, if they continue to make go back to their old roots and make some decisions that just throw positions and points away.
Yeah. Well, let's touch on one of those decisions, because the note that I had for the Red Bull is, where is it? Hold on, I gotta find it.
For the Red Bull?
Sorry, the Ferrari. I've got many notes here that are all overlapping.
I've got a Ferrari note, one of the few that I've got.
Leclerc was like the only driver at the top to end up doing the one stop. Like you say, it was, Hamilton, Russell, Leclerc all stayed out trying to do that one stop. Hamilton, Russell did jump to the two stop eventually, realizing it's not the right play to go the one stop. I think Russell sort of tried to hang with it a bit longer, but Leclerc pitted, I think, a couple of laps later than Russell did, and then he gets this radio message sort of 10, 15 laps to the end. It's like, do we go plan D or stay with plan C? And it's like, bruh, what are you doing to me? And he ended up P6 before his disqualification, which, it seemed pretty obvious watching Leclerc's pace towards the end of the race that the one stop was not the right decision. And I think he even said after the race, it's like, our predictions and calculations and all that, they were so far off what was actually
they apparently had a very half-assed kind of answer, especially when Freddie was asked about it. And he just said, we got it wrong. It's like, well, what did you get wrong? And they went, our data told us wrong. It's like, but you kind of look past the data, you compare it to see what's going on. If your data was so far off on that,
why you have a strategist on the pit wall to make
surely
these
it would have been
decisions,
off like leading up to that point. It's not like it was suddenly like, oh yeah, you'll be wearing, and then suddenly it gets good. It's like, obviously it's gonna get tremendously worse.
What the strategist did is, like, on the Saturday or the Sunday before the race, he put out his notes. He's like, cool, I'm going home, and then just left, and then they figured it all out.
Left, his notes.
Yep, and they just followed it to the note, and they didn't do anything on the race day.
I did see I saw a great quote from Pierre Gasly. I don't know if you saw it. Where Pierre Gasly to the media, he said that Charles came to me on the grid before the race and asked if I'm also going for a one stop, and I said no fucking way. So even Alpine were like, we already rolling this shit out before the race has started.
Oh, so good. That's so good.
So Charles are probably like, are we sure? The team are like, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I think it's a
starts
great
on pole. Again, it seemed like that. It's like that car seemed bad. Again, Sainz was almost there. He was only 15 off max. That's not that bad if you consider, what that gap would look like at the start of the year.
Sainz started behind. He started P6, I think, as well. Or P7.
He wasn't super near the top.
Yeah, I think he must have been behind.
Sainz was
P5.
He started 4th.
Did he start 4th?
Yeah.
Oh, I must be thinking of the sprint.
And then they were running. I know. And then they were running 2nd and 3rd at the start. Still kind of together.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Sainz got a really good start as well.
They were 2nd and 3rd, and they basically finished 4th and 6th.
Yes.
So again, that car seemed fine. Yeah. It's just other teams picking it up and making those calls which matter. It was one of these races.
Yep. Yeah. Well. Yeah, I guess before we touch on the DQs, because we obviously touched.
We can skim through some other teams.
Yeah, because I want to talk about Aston. And
go for it.
Because Aston, they brought a new update as well. I don't know if it was an update to the floor, or if I'm getting that mixed up with another team, but they brought an update.
It seemed to be a few things. It was like a medium update. It wasn't a zero update. Yeah,
so they brought that update, and in on Friday and Saturday, they looked dog shit. And who was it that made the comments? Like every time, I think it was Norris who made a comment that's like, every time they bring an update, they go backwards, they get slower. And it's like, yeah, it does seem that way. So
it was further compounded by the fact that even towards the start, I think Stroll got like no practice time because they saw stuff wrong.
Yeah, I don't think either driver got really good practice time.
And then when they finally got running, their brakes were like on fire. So they obviously... Whether that was because of their setup and whether it was compounded because of just the conditions of the track, obviously, yes, they could have really used an extra 2 practice sessions, and they didn't have it.
So they looked bad. I think Alonso got knocked out in Q1 as well.
They were both out in Q1 for the main qualifying.
Yeah,
in the sprint, I know Stroll was ahead of Alonso, which I'm only saying that because Stroll actually had okay pace, but Alonso was just like, this is the worst thing ever, and the car was not good.
Yep.
So much so, as you probably go over, yes, they were one of 2 teams that started their cars from the grid because they decided to revert one of the cars and basically start them both in the same controlled experiment to collect data, because they just said, scrap the race, we're going to just collect data between the old one and the new one, because obviously we got no idea what the hell we've done wrong here. So this is the best way to do that.
I think Alonso ran the old package and Stroll was running the new package.
And he didn't even make it to the end. Oops.
I think he came on the radio saying he's got a suspension failure. I tried to look
rear
up...
suspension failure,
I didn't see any updated news. I think when he was speaking to media after the race, is like, I'm not sure what exactly it was. The team said they had floor damage. It didn't seem like a total failure.
They didn't, because they said initially they didn't see anything. But then obviously they saw something or enough where they just said it's not worth. We gotta
but
pucker up, Barry.
To be honest, like they both started from the pit lane after making changes. They had to change something, like even with Stroll's car. I think even though he was running the new package, I'm sure they had to have changed enough to start it from the pit lane.
Well, they would have, even if they kept it on him, change the setup or something, right?
So, and it turns out that like they were both running in the points before Alonso ended up retiring.
He was one place.
He was literally Stroll. Like Alonso Stroll, and it was pretty much that way the entire race.
And they were chasing down Gasly for that best of the rest.
I think so.
Actually. Yeah, I guess is where the credit for Stroll's coming through for.
Yeah. So, and that was kind of my point, is like, actually their pace wasn't too bad. Like, considering that they made like setup changes and then had literally no time to change the car. They just have to assume that the setup changes worked. That they can go from the pit lane to, both running, I think they were running P9, P10 before Alonso went out, and Stroll ended up P9 on track, P7 in the race.
And he was only 7/10 behind Gasly as well.
Yeah, it was very, very close. So I think there is... They did say it was obviously quite a risk to bring an update to the US Grand Prix, obviously because of the sprint weekend. So I would expect them to be doing a lot of running during Mexico to try and understand it better, because I think there is potentially some pace in that package, but I just think they need to understand it and actually get time to set up the car properly. So, but I want to say, fair play to Stroll. He was kind of matching, again, different packages. You don't know how much it's
hard to know, but if he was doing this the entire year,
you'd be like,
great. Again, I think we said this almost about, I don't know if it was about him and then you're someone else, where it's like, okay, this is now the standard. It's like, if you keep at this standard or above, you're doing all right. If you drop below again at all, then stuff it. There's nothing.
Well, let's talk about another team that did something very similar, and that's Williams. Because I was watching Sargent's pace throughout the race, and he finished just behind Albon, and he was basically matching Albon's pace.
Keeping up with him for the first time in his career.
And he did end up P12 on track, but it eventuated that he got P10, so through some fortune, but some good fortune. But he finally has his first point in Formula One, and he will no longer finish on the bottom below Nick de Vries. So that's great for him.
Yes.
On
the trend with these small teams, I was going to say, we're starting to talk about these weekends where, the best of those battling for P7 finished like in 11th, and it's a really well-deserved P11, but there just wasn't enough drivers from the top that made a mistake or retired to give them a point. And this was one of those weekends where you get it right, and actually you cash in. Because Yuki, not only did that team pull a blinder to put him on the sauce for fastest lap, I love that, because we always see Max doing it or someone else doing it. The fact that the race was ending, and they cut to Yuki, and you're like, what is he doing? Why are they cutting to Yuki? Like, huh? And then he's screaming around on red tires, and you're like, oh, and then suddenly you're like, go, 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 go! And he's like, just tossing it around. And it was, at that time, it was only for 10th plus a fastest lap point, which again, for that battle with 7th is massive. And then you get the 2 disqualifications, which means he gets an 8th with that,
Yep.
which is huge.
Yep.
That's big. So this is where it matters. And again, you look at like a Hulkenberg or a Bottas or a Zhao. That's painful. They could have been up there. Like, again, we kind of weren't following them because there was so much else happening.
Yeah.
But I know afterwards they were saying that Haas actually, although it also started from the pit lane, it was one where they were actually, their trend for the past few years has been they qualify well, but they really struggle in the race.
Pace, yeah.
And they also brought a fairly big package here. And they said for once they felt like they were actually gaining on everyone else. They weren't falling back. And they were really happy with that. So it's a shame that they weren't actually starting near the front this weekend for once. Because they might have been able to get that 8th, 9th, 10th.
Yeah.
And that, of course, is now going to sting. But it just means, we've got such a close battle at the front. But, this battle at the back, this could have huge ramifications there.
Speaking of the battle at the back, let's go through the point standings from 7th down. We've got Williams on 26. We've got Alfa Romeo on 16. Haas on 12. AlphaTauri on 10. It is very close.
And that's big for AlphaTauri.
Yeah.
Yuki, very good job, son.
Huge for him, yeah. So they, I think Ricciardo said he actually had pretty good pace in the car as well. He ended up finishing right at the back. I think he got the fastest lap for a short period of time.
He had it before, yes. He had good pace, but they said he had a number of, I think it was like little bits of damage. I think they said there was something stuck in his wing, which was causing really bad effects to his downforce.
Apparently, his front left brake duct was damaged.
Brake duct.
Yeah, I found this out earlier. Yeah, he just had
that's really bad.
He just had no pace at all. It's like, this is the best I can
almost
do.
Even in let me check something ever so quickly.
Sure.
Because in the sprint shootout, he almost made Q3.
Yeah, that's right.
He was 11th, which was insane. If he made it through, oh my god, that would have been amazing.
Yeah, it would have been massive.
So
yeah, fair play. I think it is, like you say, it's all to play for those minor positions, and it's hard to see. This is probably the first year where I think we just haven't really had a back marker at all, because it just
you can call those 4 teams back markers, but really they're they're
just
not really.
the battle for 7th
exactly
at this point,
and they can sometimes battle with an Aston Martin and Alpine.
It does happen. We saw both Astons out in Q1, so
exactly.
But
pushed out by somebody.
I think it's exciting. I think it is something we have to look at. We don't. While the battle at the front is closing, and that's awesome, I think the battle at the back is probably a lot closer than the battle at the front at this stage. So it's all to play for. But I'm not sure if you had anything else to talk about. That's about all I had.
No, I don't think so. I think we can have a look at what happened. I don't know what timeline it happened, because I was curious. I was watching the
2
post
hours
race
after, so it was
just I was skimming through to see if they're interviewing someone, and then someone they go, "Whoa, big news!"
Yeah.
I actually I didn't watch this race until Monday evening Melbourne time. And as much as I was abstaining from spoilers, the only thing I saw was basically I think it was a tweet or a Facebook notification or something that just said, "Here's what it looks like after the DQ," and that's all I saw. So I was like, "Oh, okay." So while I was watching the race, I'm thinking, is it because of track limits? Is someone, it could just be one of those.
Yeah.
If I feel like if it was a DQ in the race from someone doing something bad,
like a black flag or something.
You gave me your little teaser and you were just it was pretty good, it was decent. I feel like if someone got DQ'd for an on-track thing, you probably would have said something different.
True.
You would have been like, something wild happened, and I would have been like, why did someone get disqualified in the race?
Yeah.
So I figured it had to be a post-race thing. No idea who it was or what it was for. But yeah, have you got? I did look at the information, but have you got it from your side to know?
Just from memory, it was just under 2 hours after the race, when they were doing their post-race scrutineering checks, which are randomized tests. They pick a few cars to do random checks on random parts of the car. So in this instance, it was the top 3 finishers. So it was Max, Hamilton, Lando, and Leclerc, I think it was, were the 4 cars that were checked, and they checked the skid plate on the bottom of the car, which has to be at least 9 millimeters, I think I was reading, as long as it's
By race end, yes.
plus or minus, I think 0.2 millimeters or something.
Like
There's
that,
some
yeah.
kind of leniency with that, but it has to meet that minimum requirement to stop the cars running too low. I think it was something brought in like the 90s. It was some kind of rule, so it's been around for a while. Yeah,
it's not. This isn't something new. It's
no,
it's
no,
been
it's
very
not like
hard
it's
for a
been. It's
while,
come in
so.
the last 2 years because of the ground effect cars and the porpoising. It has
Yes.
been around for quite a while. So, and yeah, if they find the that skid plate to be worn under the minimum requirement, then yeah, you get disqualified. And it just so happens that Hamilton and Leclerc both were found under the minimum. And I've actually got a photo here. I'm gonna send it to you first.
Oh yeah.
But it's actually a comparison of the ride heights between Max, Lewis, and Charles. But that's the difference in ride heights around one of the corners.
Yeah.
And you can actually see, yeah. So you can see the top image. There is a clear gap between the floor and the ground, and then you can obviously see the Mercedes and the Ferrari both clipping the ground quite hard, hard enough to make sparks. So, yeah, it is. It's obvious that they were running it quite a bit lower. I think even Ferrari came out and said we raised the ride height even after FP1 because we realized we might have been running too low. Apparently, they were too conservative with too conservative with the what's the word?
Choice to raise it higher.
Yeah,
like
they should have raised it higher, but they didn't. They probably, obviously the higher you raise it, the more downforce you lose, being all the downforce is created through the floor.
And again, the lack of practice makes it harder to judge these things.
And that was
at a circuit, which is why they were talking about the bumps, saying it's really hard over the course of a race to predict how hard those bumps would ride the car. And it turns out two of the big teams, just got it slightly wrong. And
you know who
happens sometimes.
who should be sighing a very big sigh of relief is Carlos Sainz and George Russell for not having their cars randomly selected because there's a good chance that they would have failed as well. So
there's a good chance they said that majority of cars might have gotten thrown out after that race for it. It is just a random thing. I don't think anyone's saying they need to change the process or whatever, right? This is just how it works.
It is just how it works. Like you say, it's a lot of people will be upset at it, but it's not, like you say, it's not a new thing. This is something that has happened. It's completely random. They don't always check the same components of the car every weekend. It's random, whenever they go to the weighbridge as well, you see them go into the weighbridge during qualifying, things like that. That's all random as well. It's just sort of luck of the draw, and it just so happens, And even then, like none of the drivers or the teams from Ferrari, Mercedes are criticizing the FIA about it. I think that's important. The only thing that they're slightly criticizing is the fact this was a sprint weekend. We didn't have enough time. But for the most part, they kind of just took it on the chin and said, look, other drivers got it right, other teams got it right, we didn't. That's just the way it is. So, and I think it's important to understand that because I know a lot of people will be mad. I don't engage in sort of the Twitter sphere of discussions, so I don't know if people are actually mad about it, but it seems like the kind of thing that people would be mad about. But yeah, I think it's important to realize that no one that is actually matters is calling and screaming for heads. So I think it's important to note. But what it does mean is that Norris gets P2 and Sainz gets a P3. So that's quite a different podium than what we had on after the race. Indeed. So, but it doesn't
be important to note should be important. No, I'm just shitposting. Should be important to note that for our predictions, I already calculated before I saw the disqualification. So I'm sorry, but this result doesn't count.
Boy, this is
the FIA post check doesn't apply to our. It's outside of this.
Where's that stipulation? I want to read that in our contract.
I mean, I designed the competition, so I'll get you a contract if you want it.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Is it Is it post-dated? Is it a post-dated contract? Yeah.
No. Don't need to look into the.
What
Go on.
What I was gonna say is, it doesn't take away from. It's something you alluded to earlier. I don't think it takes away from Mercedes' performance in that race. Yes, again, it's one of those things. It's hard to say whether or not them running the car lower helped their pace over the Red Bull, considering Red Bull did run it much higher. But there's also the argument to say
this type of thing is nearly intangible. This type of but like, it's not just running it low. It's also like they can even put like a slightly thicker plane on it as well. So there's different things that they can do. So it's like it might have even been to like strengthen that plate a bit, or as you said, like jack it up the tiniest bit higher. It's not like we're talking about half a meter bloody higher in the sky. It's like the tiniest little 1/2 a screw length to raise it. Which might be worth half a second over the entire of the bloody race, right? Like they're gonna of course get it as low as they can because they want every bit of it. That's the risk reward you take, and that was the difficulty here with the bumps being so much worse than they expected. And that's part of why they also came out to say, look, it would also help if the bumps were lower here because it just makes everything easier to control because it's even harder to predict what to do when the track's in such a state.
And like there's also the argument to say because it was so bumpy, they running the car so low, the bumps obviously if you lower it too low, it could have been a detriment. Exactly, it could have like balanced itself out. So
exactly,
it's one of those things. It's hard to sort of quantify how much pace was gained or lost by doing it. So I think I think you have to kind of just take it as it is and just look at the pace that everyone had and just kind of assume it's accurate. But like I said, it doesn't take away from that Mercedes pace. And I think they are. It does show that they are strong, regardless of the fact that they don't keep that P2. So, a bit of a weird one. Something I we haven't seen for a long time, considering it's been a rule since.
Or it's sometimes like a car like an Alpine or a middle team car that might get down there. You go, oh, that's odd, but then the impact isn't really seen. Not two drivers and two of the front runners as well. You have to look back to figure out when this scenario kind of happened.
Yeah, that's it. So, I guess we will look towards being a triple header. We got to look towards the Mexican and Brazilian Grand Prix. They go back to back to back. So, I think just keep on rolling and. We'll wrap this up unless you had anything else to add. That was
all good here.
Perfect. Thank you everyone for watching or listening. Remember to hit subscribe or follow if you're on Spotify, things like that. Leave us a like, leave us a comment. We'll be back very, very soon for our preview for the Mexican Grand Prix. Take care everyone, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Ciao.